the things that were left unsaid, for all the times I found promises dead. I had nightmares along the way. I made prayers in vain.
I bet that was a big number right there on that elite that just disintegrated. You just got it.
I'm awake, I'm alive.
Get it rolling. I guarantee you that one of those, we just evaporated multiple.
I gotta save these somehow.
Oh my god! There's no way! Guys, there's just no way! Yo guys, what is up? Moxsy Diablo 4 video, and today we're going over my updated Lightning Shred build. This is Lightning Shred 2.0, and I've revised the build to make it significantly more tanky and also obviously too a lot more damage. I'm going to be explaining everything you guys need to know in this build video. Before we get into it, if you guys haven't hit the subscribe button, we did hit a 1.8 billion damage on screen in Diablo 4. If that doesn't earn a subscription, I don't really know what would. So I appreciate that, guys. We're getting so close to hitting 300k. And with that, let's get right into the build video. So I made a 7-minute video specifically talking about the double dip damage ramp up that this build gets to take advantage of. And if you want to learn everything about damage ramp and double dipping, you can watch that video. I'm going to do a quick refresher course though for those of you that didn't watch it or are still unsure. So the core, the lifeblood of this build is this aspect right here. Critical strikes with Shred deal 45% of the damage dealt as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. This damage is double dipping. What that means is it is getting my damage multipliers, all of my applicable damage multipliers, multiple times. So, for example, if an enemy is vulnerable and I hit them with Shred, I am going to deal more damage to that enemy because they're vulnerable. Because my Shred does more damage to vulnerable enemies, this aspect, which scales off of Shred, will then deal more damage. However, this aspect, when it hits, is going to get that vulnerable damage multiplier again. So all of my damage to close, all of my damage while fortified, all of my all damage to vulnerable, all of those things are getting applied multiple times when I'm hitting enemies, and that is what is leading to the absurd damage ramp up of this build. On top of that, we are using Grisly Rage. Now, in Grisly Rage, it's really important to get the aspect where it turns us into a dire werewolf. This is going to give us movement speed and, more importantly, spirit cost reduction so we can spam Shred. However, what's even more important is the duration of Grisly Rage is going to give us stacking crit damage. With this build, we are stacking well over 1000% crit damage to enemies, and the more crits that we hit in Grisly Rage, the more this additive crit damage multiplier is going to stack up. Crit damage being multiplicative, but this stacks up 10% per crit, and we're critting all the time. The reason that we're able to crit all the time with all of our abilities is the Waxing Gibbous. I was pronouncing that wrong before. It's the Waxing Gibbous, or Gibbous, sorry. But this reads, gain stealth for 2 seconds when killing enemies with Shred. Breaking stealth with an attack grants ambush, which guarantees critical strikes for 2.1 seconds up to 2.5. This allows us to hit crits guaranteed constantly. And the way that we're able to ramp up damage so quickly is you're going to want to get into Grisly Rage and just start deleting things with Shred. You're going to be stacking up all of your damage multipliers. You're stacking up Grisly Rage, and Grisly Rage is going to give us that increased crit damage, and that increased crit damage is going to scale the Shred damage aspect, the Stormclaw aspect, which gives us ludicrous amounts of damage on this build. One more thing to point out is this lightning damage with Shred cannot critically strike. It has a 0% chance to critically strike. If we got a lethal shrine, which guarantees our critical strikes, we would then get this damage as crit damage, and then we would benefit from our 1000% damage multiplier, and then I think we could easily see a 100 billion damage. I think that's honestly on the lower end. I haven't found a lethal shrine and all the stars aligning at the same time, but I do think we could legit like break the integer cap for the game with this. Now, how are we able to do this much damage? You've copied the build, you've got the Paragon board. what is causing the damage ramp up to hit so high? And I honestly, I wish I could explain it. It seems pretty random. It seems pretty bugged. The number one thing to make it more consistent that I found is you need to kill a ton of things in Grizzly Rage, and you need to be snowballing. You want to be getting your build to the point where you are one-shotting everything. It wasn't until I started one-shotting elites and one-shotting whole packs that I was able to start seeing this crazy damage ramp up. The other thing is it felt more consistent in certain dungeons. For example, Champ's Demise and Blind Burrows, what I usually run, I wasn't seeing this damage. And then dungeons like the Zenith Nightmares and Core Dragon, I was noticing it more. So I don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, the damage seems random. But the biggest thing to make it consistent is to be in Grizzly Rage and critting as much as you possibly can. Now let's go over my gear, and the very first thing to note is the Waxing Gibbous. This is the most must-have piece of gear for this build. I've talked to a lot of players who have started building this build from earlier on, and I've gotten a lot of notes about spirit cost and the build not working great, and as soon as players get this item, they're like, oh, now it works. So this is kind of the big cornerstone of the build. If you want to try to get into this, you just kind of need the Waxing Gibbous. For high Nightmare Dungeon pushes, this thing falls off pretty hard because you need to get a kill to get enemies to start ramping this crit damage. And if you're not snowballing, it doesn't work very well. So for like super high Nightmare Dungeon pushings, I'll probably come out with another version of this build. But for like Nightmare speed farming, this is the best weapon. The other unique that's really nice to have is the Tempest Roar. This is so much quality of life for us. Our base Storm skills are now also Werewolf skills, which allows us to use Hurricane and Cyclone armor while we're in Grizzly Rage, which is going to turn us into a werewolf. Hurricane will then become a werewolf skill, so it'll constantly be poisoning enemies around us, which is going to give us our increased damage, our 60% increased damage with Envenom. So the Tempest Roar is also a kind of a must-have, but it's not nearly as needed as the Waxing Gibbous. Next up, I've got on the Mad Wolf's Glee. Now, I'm going to be honest, I personally have swapped off of this chess piece, but for the 1.8 billion, I was using this chess piece because it was giving us a ton of extra damage because of the +2 ranks. If you are finding you're having survivability issues with this build, I strongly recommend using something like this chess piece. I also bought this chess piece off the market, which I plan to be using. It's level 99. I'm only level 98, so I can't use it yet. But the chess piece that I'm using for higher Nightmare Dungeons right now has damage reduction from distance, intelligence, throwaway stat, damage reduction from close, and damage reduction while fortified, while also we got the aspect where we gain damage reduction while shapeshifted into a werewolf. The amount of survivability that you get from a chess piece like this is astronomical versus a weak chess piece like the Mad Wolf's Glee, which is really only providing us with damage. The ideal rolls that you're looking for on your chess piece are triple roll damage reduction, probably plus max health or armor. Damage reduction from close, damage reduction from fortified, and damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned are the best forms of damage reduction for this build. Next up, we're on to our gauntlets. Most important things on your gauntlets are +4 ranks of shred and attack speed. Attack speed is really important for this build. The faster that you hit enemies, because Grizzly Rage is a limited time thing, the faster that you hit enemies, the faster that you can stack up your guaranteed crit damage in Grizzly Rage, this additive crit damage that's going to be stacking to 1,000. The difference between attack speed and not could lead you to like 40% less damage in Grizzly Rage. So try to get as much attack speed as you can. I don't have a max roll on this, so I could get more attack speed, but it's really nice. The other thing is lucky hit chance is great for this build, and storm skill cooldown reduction is also really nice. You do not need crit chance for this build if you're using the Waxing Gibbous because you're going to have 100% crit chance. Next up for our pants, we're trying to use a quad damage reduction pants. I've only got triple damage reduction, but damage reduction from fortified, damage reduction from distant enemies, and dexterity. If you are having survivability issues on this build, these P2 pieces, your chest piece and your pants, are going to make a world of difference in giving you more survivability. And then we've got the aspect of disobedience for even more damage reduction. Next up on our boots, big thing that you're looking out for here is spirit cost reduction. You want to be able to shred as often as possible. If you're running out of spirit or having spirit issues, getting spirit cost reduction on all of your pieces of gear is a massive help. Movement speed actually doesn't really do anything for this build, unfortunately. movement speed is very nice, but Shred has its own speed multiplier where you are just going to be dashing anyways, and you're dashing 90% of the time that you're in this build. So if you could roll some more damage reduction or more quality of life things here, you could. I'll probably show on screen some things that you could possibly roll better than movement speed, but obviously the base movement speed value is really nice. I don't think you need the movement speed after killing an elite. Next up for our totem, we're using the Grizzly Rage. Turns you into a dire werewolf. This is crucial for the build. Build really needs this aspect because otherwise you can't do the things. You're not going to be able to turn into a werewolf and use your werewolf skills. It's also going to give us that massive spirit cost reduction. With this piece, I moved this from my amulet. With this piece, I'm getting, what is it? Like 70% spirit cost reduction just by being in Grizzly Rage, plus all of my other spirit cost reductions, which is really nice. And we've got cooldown on this and spirit cost reduction and damage reduction from enemies that are poisoned. The crit chance is kind of a dead roll just because we're not benefiting from crit chance. But cooldown and spirit cost are the two most important things to get on your totem. And then if you can get more damage reduction, that is fantastic. Then for our rings, this is kind of a perfect ring in my eyes. I haven't gotten another perfect ring, but this is what you're looking for on your rings is max life, vulnerable damage, crit damage, and then crit damage with werewolf skills. Seems to be really good. This one is also pretty good, is damage to close, lucky hit, crit damage, vulnerable. The damage to close technically does double dip, while the crit damage with werewolf skills doesn't. So for technically pushing the double dip of this even higher, you would want to prioritize close. But like any way that you can get crit vulnerable or a crit vulnerable damage multiplier is going to be really good. And lastly, our amulet. The most important thing on your amulet, the absolute must have for this build, is +3 ranks into Envenom. That is such a gross, disgusting amount of damage. It's going to give us 60% additional crit damage against poisoned enemies. We are going to be poisoning everything. 60% additional crit damage to them is wild because we are always critting. And our Hurricane's going to poison enemies before we get to them. So like as we approach enemies, the poison is going to hit them with the Hurricane if you have a Tempest Roar, and then boom, you hit them with the Shred, and they're going to take 60x damage from that, which is ridiculous. For our Spirit Boons, we're using Wariness for 10% reduced damage from elites. We've got Avian Wrath for 30% crit damage. This is really important because, once again, we're critting all the time. Then we've got Calamity, extends the duration of ultimate skills. This allows us to be in Grizzly Rage for more time, which gives us more damage. Then we've got Masochistic, crit strikes with shapeshifting skills heal you. We are critting all the time. This is constant health. And then Calm Before the Storm, Lucky Hit, Nature Magic skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skills by 2 seconds. Now, this is what allows us to upkeep Grizzly Rage, is these Lucky Hits with Nature Magic skills. Note that the only way to get this Lucky Hit is with either Cyclone Armor, which has a 30% Lucky Hit chance, or Hurricane, which has a 30% Lucky Hit chance. These are going to be constantly hitting enemies, or at least Hurricane is, and so that's why it's really nice to get Lucky Hit chance on your rings if you can, and you should definitely try to get it on your gauntlets because it'll allow you to be in Grizzly Rage more often, because this will give you cooldown while you're in Grizzly Rage. The worst cooldown I've ever seen when not hitting a lot of enemies and not killing things is 15 seconds with this build. And if you're absolutely steamrolling, it is possible to have basically seamlessly transition from one Grizzly Rage to a next, which is really important because Grizzly Rage is our only form of unstoppable on this build. If you lose Grizzly Rage, that is when you're going to die on this build. You like really will not die while you're in Grizzly Rage because you've got unstoppable and you've got guaranteed crits and all your crits are healing you. We've got a ton of damage reduction and fortify. But yeah, the time window that you're not in Grizzly Rage is most likely when you'll die if you're dying on this build. For our skill tree, we're using Storm Strike with Fierce Storm Strike. This is going to give us a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable, which is really important because if an enemy survives your vulnerable window, this is our only way to make them vulnerable again. And if you've been playing this game, you know that enemies being vulnerable is really important in order to kill them, especially in the higher levels. Then we've got Wild Impulses over here. Our core skills cost more spirit, but deal increased damage. Then we go over to Shred with Primal Shred. This recently got buffed, so Shred now gives us more life when it hits, and it does more crit damage, which is also leading to the absurd damage that we're able to deal. Then we've got Cyclone Armor. I did originally want to try to fit in Debilitating Roar, but it just never really worked out. It wasn't as smooth. So we're using Cyclone Armor with every 10 seconds. Cyclone Armor intensifies, causing incoming damage to grant you 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds. This is really nice quality of life. And then Blood Howl giving us attack speed. If you are having spirit issues on this build, you can use Innate Blood Howl to give you the 20 spirit, but the much better option is the attack speed because it's going to lead to more damage. Then we're coming down here for Elemental Exposure and Endless Tempest. This is going to give us an increased duration of our Hurricane, which is giving us +2 to all of our shred, which is really, really nice. And we're also grabbing Savage Hurricane. Enemies affected by Hurricane deal 20% less damage. This is a massive survivability tool because it's going to poison enemies. It's going to slow them down. It's going to give us Grizzly Rage back, and it's going to make enemies deal less damage. That is why the Storm skill cooldown and the cooldown stats are really important to get here because it'll lead to much more uptime of Hurricane, which is more damage and more survivability. Then we're coming over here to Neurotoxin. Poison enemies are slowed. The all-important Envenom, and also Toxic Claws. You technically don't need these 3 points, but the more poison damage is more damage, and we're guaranteeing crits, so it's just more damage with this build. Here is our real big survivability nodes. Increase the amount of Fortify you gain from all sources, chance when struck to Fortify, and reduces the duration of controlling effects on you. Triple this effect if you have Fortify. This is giving us a ton of Fortify, and Grizzly Rage is also giving us a ton of Fortify. We're gaining 589 as Fortify per second while Grizzly Rage is active. So the more we stay in Grizzly Rage, we're getting constant Fortify from this, which is going to give us more damage. While you're unstoppable while Grizzly Rage is active, you're unstoppable while Grizzly Rage is active, and the Fortify is really, really nice. And then lastly, we get down to the bottom of the tree. Now, this choice is entirely up to you. When I hit the 1.8 billion, I was using Lupine Ferocity. I think the stars aligned and my shred hit when this was active. The one thing to note about Lupine Ferocity, because it is fantastic, is every tick that Hurricane hits actually stacks it. So a lot of the times you're getting this really, really fast, but a lot of the times your shred also isn't benefiting from it. The occasional shred while you're zipping around that hits for like 3 million, not the crit part, not the storm aspects part, is really, really nice. However, this gives us, while healthy, 30% increased damage. Ignore the Werebear stat because we don't benefit from the Werebear stat, but while healthy, we'll deal 30% increased damage. Now, the important thing to note about this is this double dips. The Storm Claws aspect will double dip in this 30% versus it will not double dip in this multiplier. So I think Ursine Strength, even though it's weird and it's for Werebear, is actually the more consistent, higher damage multiplier for this build. Now we get to my Paragon board, and the big change that I made to my Paragon board is I am way less invested into the Ancestral Guidance board. The reason for that is I was originally here for the 28% core skill damage, plus another 14% core skill damage. And that is all really great and dandy. However, core skill damage is not a double dip damage multiplier. And for that reason, we are unspecking from that and just grabbing Ancestral Guidance, which is a double dip damage multiplier for this build, that 30% increased damage after spending 75% spirit. Real quick, this full build and the Paragon board that you can click around on and look at is going to be on our website, dpscheck.gg. That is where you can find all of the builds that I've posted. I know some of you guys like following a written guide for the Paragon board, so dpscheck.gg. That should be a pinned comment in the description. Then we're coming up to the Lust for Carnage board. Lust for Carnage is going to give us the crit strikes with werewolf skills, restore spirit, really good spirit sustain. We've also got attack speed here, and we're using the werewolf glyph with a ton of willpower, another massive damage dip multiplier, which we're going to increase our damage while in werewolf form, which we're always in. Then we're coming over to our inner beast board. Here I've got the spirit glyph. Now I do plan on experimenting with taking out spirit glyph and putting in the territorial glyph. The reason for that is the crit damage with core skills is only a single dip, and it's additive, I believe, with all of the other crit damage that we're stacking on this build. So not as important. However, the crit strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you up to 12x, is double dipping, and also another big multiplier. So for now, I've got this, but the other option to put there would be the territorial glyph, which is you deal increased damage to close enemies. That should be also another double dip that we could benefit from that I do not have in my board. From the inner beast board, we're coming down to Ancestral Guidance, grabbing that and getting out as fast as we can. We're coming back up here for the increased damage and attack speed. All of the increased damages do double dip. Then we're coming up to the Heightened Malice board. Heightened Malice, I love this little section here. We're putting the Fang and Claw. It's going to grant us bonus to all magic nodes, and while in werewolf or werebear form, close enemies take 12% increased damage. This is going to give us another double dip, and we're boosting all of these magic nodes, and there's so many good magic nodes here. We've got damage to poison enemies, which would double dip, and we've also got damage reduction for poison enemies, which help us with our survivability. So I really, really love this. And then we're going over here, 20% more damage to poison enemies, more damage to elites, another double dip. We've got some more life over here, poison resist, heightened malice, another double dip multiplier, 45% increased damage. And then lastly, we're coming down over to this board. I swapped this board to get a little bit more damage reduction. We've got damage reduction from vulnerable enemies here, which is really nice. And then we've got the Undaunted glyph here for 61% damage while fortified, and more damage reduction the more fortify you have. We are always fortified on this build, so that's really, really nice. Once again, I do think you could swap in Territorial glyph here. I think that would be fine, either for the Undaunted or for the Spirit, but I just wanted to show you guys what I'm rocking because I don't have a Territorial like leveled up to the level of like all of these other glyphs yet to like fully test that. Guys, that is going to do it for the build video. I hope you enjoyed. If you haven't dropped a like on the video or subscribed, 1.8 billion damage. I really do think that deserves at least a like on the video or maybe a subscription. I do appreciate that, guys. I will catch y'all in the next one. I hope you enjoyed. I will have the full written guide for this build on dpscheck.gg as soon as I'm able to post that. And hopefully Blizzard doesn't nerf this into the ground. I don't think it needs to get nerfed, I'm going to be honest, just because it really only works in like scaling, killing, like small enemies leading up to elites. That is really, really important part of this build. It's not going to delete Uber Lilith in like 1 second. But yeah, guys, that is it for the build video. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.